Hello, everybody. I'm here with Lee Chalmers. Lee is an old colleague of mine, and I'll let her introduce herself. Hi, Lee. Can you say a little bit about yourself and what's attracted you to be part of this interview?
So I'm Lee Chalmers. I am, what am I? I don't know. I'm many, many things. It's always interesting when someone asks me to talk about myself, because I do a bunch of different things. I work in learning and development in the same way that Mark does. So kind of corporate stuff and talking to leaders about how they can lead differently or be more effective. But I also run a not-for-profit that I founded about 5 years ago that is about getting women into politics. And I've been active in that kind of area of feminism and gender equality for quite a long time. And I'm also have another couple of things. I'm also doing a PhD at University of Edinburgh on women's experiences of online abuse. So still in the area of gender equality. And my project to come out of lockdown is to focus on midlife women and to from a very positive perspective, create ideas of midlife that are positive and kind of counter some of the narratives about, you hit 50 and that's life over. So that's me. That's what I do. all those
That sounds
things.
like quite a lot, I have to say.
Yes.
And so how have you reached that point, Lee? Obviously, we all have a story, and you very kindly just hinted that you're approaching that midlife moment. So tell us a bit about, how did you grow into that place? What was life like for you growing up, and that trajectory into authenticity?
Yeah, so I mean, I had a really great childhood. I was brought up in the west coast of Scotland. I'm the elder of two daughters, so I had a younger sister, just my mum and dad. Very good childhood. We moved abroad when I was young, which was actually very interesting and quite formative. So it was about when I was 10, we moved to South Africa in the early 80s when the recession really hit in the UK. And we were economic migrants basically out of the UK looking for work. Mm-hmm. And we moved to South Africa, and of course at 10 years old I had no clue about any of the background of that at all. I'm pretty sure mum and dad didn't either, and that's weird to kind of say that now, but that's you can imagine in the days of hardly any television how that might have been the case.
Yeah.
And that really gave me an experience of what it's like to live as other. In a different context, and really not like it and really want to be elsewhere, and then to come back to Scotland about a year and a half later and then not belong there either, and to kind of have the narrative of the way you see things here are the right way and the only way, and once you've lived abroad you know that that's not the case.
Yes.
So that kind of, I think, generated in me I always restlessness that I didn't belong in the context that I found myself in, and I was never going to take the kind of received wisdom as truth, that things always had to be examined and tested and look to see, not in a kind of paranoid way, but just because you think that's true doesn't mean that it is true. Mm. And then also something else that's really, really important is, my name is Lee and it's spelled L-E-E. And my mum did that on purpose. Lee is a gender neutral name. Mm. And my mum gave me that name because she said she thought I'd get more job interviews if people mistook me for a man. So it's true. And I think that has been the case. So I was born into a narrative where women were undervalued and much more likely to be overlooked for opportunities or seen in a negative light. And so I've always had that in the back of my mind, and I think I can trace my feminism right back to that, actually, to my naming.
Yeah, it feels like it's always been there. I hadn't quite realized that.
Yeah.
So how did that manifest for you? Is that something that you've been conscious of working with your whole life, or is that something that you sort of had to work up to or get the courage for, if you like?
I think, if I think about my teenage years, so this was in the early 90s, maybe when I was kind of 18, 19, when you're trying on identities.
Yeah.
I had pink hair, I had purple hair, I had it all shaved at the sides. That's very popular now, but it was not so popular in the 90s. And I wore a lot of really baggy clothes, and I didn't really wear makeup. And I think it's easier now as an adult to try and make sense of what I was doing. But I think I've learned very early on that a woman's value in society, especially then in the 80s and 90s, 70s, was how they look and how they serve men, right? So very much this notion of the male gaze, looking at a woman and her articulating herself in response to that. And I went out of my way not to look pretty and not to buy into that. And I do remember having a feeling of, I want you to see me. I want you to look past the presentation and see the person and meet the person, not just look at a blonde whatever, right? And so I think I was playing with that really early on. And then when I went to university in Stirling, and then I went to Leeds, and I really pursued that, and I ended up running a skateboard shop and having a shaved head and a skateboard, and I got mistaken for a man all the time. You know, I mean, that's quite a popular thing now, this notion of being gender fluid. And I think I really played with that when I was in my early 20s, that often people wouldn't know whether I was a boy or a girl. And I played with that to see who was the Lee that was behind those stories of gender, right? The stories that society tells us a woman is this and a man is that. So I played a lot with it then, really, and in my work and in my being.
Yes. So from skateboard shop to Women in Parliament.
Yes.
Tell me a bit about that.
How did that work?
Yeah.
So whilst I was running the skateboard shop, I was doing a master's in philosophy at Leeds, and I was very interested in moral development, and I started looking at women's development. That got me into feminism. That got me into understanding that there is some work in this space, right? So this is maybe when I was about 21 or 22. And I started a PhD in philosophy, and I was looking at Aristotle's theory of moral development from a feminist perspective. I never finished that. I then went to live in Brighton, kind of a couple of years into the PhD, and I worked in Borders, and this is my leadership side of things. So I was a store manager for Borders, and I learned a lot about what it's like to be a leader and what it's like to be a really bad leader. And also what happens when you have an organization that used to have a lot of women leading it, and that got changed over time as a different version of leadership took over, shall we say, and those women were kind of expelled, and then what happened to the culture in that. And so that got me really interested in this notion, well, this idea, do women lead differently? I'm not sure they do, right? So that's actually not where I'm coming from.
Okay, yeah.
But women definitely, people assume that they are not as good, right? And they're not necessarily given as many opportunities to step into leadership. And the bar is higher for women. They have to prove themselves a bit more. And I really got also interested in ideas of power. So what is power? Power to rather than power over. So why do you want people in leadership anyway? But because those are the people that get to see how it goes, you know. So they get to see how it goes in organizations, but they also get to see how it goes in the world. And does it matter if those people all look the same or not? And yes, I think it does. Because if you have all a particular type of person making the rules, they will, perhaps on purpose, but more often, I think not on purpose, just not consider how to address issues that they don't have to deal with.
Yeah.
That's the essence of it. So you need to have people making the rules, people creating legislation to come from the whole of society. And to know what it's like to raise a child on your own, or to not be able to get back to work because you don't earn so much in your part-time job and you can't pay childcare, or to know what it's like to be a woman of color or a black woman who, you know, can't get ahead because of racism steeped in society. If you only have white men in power making rules, they don't consider those perspectives. They're not able to see those perspectives, so they can't integrate them into the laws they make. And our laws are worse for that. So that's where the Parliament project came from, basically. I was in the US, this is a long time ago now, maybe 12 or 13 years ago, and I saw that there was a project called the White House Project, which was about basically encouraging women to get into politics. They had done some research that showed that women were more likely to put themselves forward if somebody encouraged them to, just meaning that they didn't necessarily automatically see themselves as political leaders.
Right.
Partly because they couldn't see themselves when they looked, right? So even from an early age, if all you see is white men, there's nothing against white men, but if that's all you see and that's not what you are, you just assume that that's not a place that you can go to.
Sure. Yeah.
So they had been operating for a while, and I remember coming back to London where I lived at the time and thinking, what is in the UK that is doing that? And I was like, oh, there's nothing. Someone should do that, I thought. And then whenever I hear that, I'm kind of like, that's you. That's you. So I started something called the Downing Street Project about 12 years ago, and that wasn't the right time, and it wasn't the right collaboration. And I let that go and went into politics myself and joined a party and began the process of getting ready to stand for election.
And you ran for office as well, didn't you?
I did, but not until later. I did, and it was about 5 or 6 years later that I reinvigorated the Parliament project, and I ran for election to the Scottish Parliament after I'd moved up to Scotland. So in 2016, I ran for election there. And then the project's 5 years old, and we've had about 3,500 women come through our workshops, and we aim to kind of demystify the process of getting into politics.
Yes.
Because we want 51% of politicians to be female, which is what ratio we are in the population.
Right. Yeah. Understood. So it's even just a sense of equity and equality in the ratio, not even that you want it to be 75 or 80. It's just about how do we represent this fairly through society's balance.
I mean, I wouldn't have a problem with it being 75% or 80, because it has been 75% or 80% men for a long time, long time. So, if it got to that for 10 or 20 or 50 years, that would be okay.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, because I mean, my personal view as a white man talking to you about this subject, I think we could probably do with 10 or 20 or 50 years of the other way around. I think that, my own perspective on how the world is and what leaders are doing right now to the world in terms of their impact on the climate, their impact on peoples, their impact on gender and race and environmental degradation, and the list goes on and on and on. That white male drive to succeed and make money has not served us, the species.
Well, I agree with that. And it's interesting that, often when people talk to me about, why I want women in, what they expect me to say is to outline a list of all the great things that women bring, right? Because they'll say, well, you obviously believe gender matters when it comes to leadership. And I think it does, but not in that way. Right. I think actually there's a white male toxicity. There's a type of leadership that a very Putin, Trump, to some extent Boris Johnson represent a version of masculinity that is incredibly constraining for them. Like they have no freedom inside the rules that they have to operate in, right? That a white man has to be strong above all things, must not be emotional, must not display any care for anyone else. It's a pissing competition all the time. It's incredibly fragile, and they are destructive with it because they have no ability to actually be resourced, to be emotionally supported. They're on their own. I mean, it sounds like I feel sorry for them, and in some way I do, right? I also am horrified by the damage that they do.
Yeah.
So I think if they were able to be freed up from that real strong gender story about what it is to be a man, I think yes.
Yeah. It
Feels
feels
so
like
much better.
an appeal to humanity rather than anything linked to gender. It's about how do we serve each other with compassion and humility. I mean, that's what
Yeah.
I'm hearing. Am I wrong?
Yeah, completely. But I think there is a story of masculinity that won't allow for that.
Yes.
And I think gender are stories, right?
Yes.
I think there are stories that we tell ourselves and each other about, you know, when a baby's born into the world, okay, so you're a boy, and therefore the story of you will be this.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, and we can tell different stories.
Yeah.
That can free ourselves from that.
I understand. Well, Lee, I mean, there's so much from your story. There's so much there. I was furiously writing. There are 3 areas I'd like to explore with you a bit more deeply. So the first one, I was really struck by your formative years and how that felt to me to be about experimentation and discovery around identity, around who you are, around perception, external perception of who you are, and how that led you to your authentic self. That I'd love to hear more about that. There's another one which you talked briefly about, and actually is part of the reason for us talking to people, is this relationship between authenticity and power. Because all too often what we notice is that authentics are not especially interested in gaining power unless it furthers their own purpose or their cause that they're in service to. And the opposite to that is that other people seek power for its own sake. And unfortunately, those are the people who get into power often. And so there seems to be this sort of duality around, am I a sort of a boss style leader, a ruler style leader who just wants power and authority and privilege? Or am I authentic and in service to a purpose? And power is only a means of getting there if I need to get that at the time. So really interested in that. And then the third one is our laws are worse for not being integral in terms of the way that laws are made. You know, consideration of others, inclusion of mainstream and fringe, so that there's a truly inclusive set of laws. And how, as somebody who is authentic, how can you genuinely get there? How can you really, you know, get to a place where those laws are being made in that way? That would be really quite something, I think, that integral perspective. So let's start with the beginning, the experimentation and discovery. How important was that?
I mean, it's interesting as you ask that. The question that arises in my mind is it over? Because I feel like it's still happening. Right? I feel like it's an ongoing process. And I feel like it's a challenging the narrative of who I should be. Right? So as a woman in my 20s, child, by having pink hair with shaved bits or whatever, it's challenging the narrative that above all things you must make yourself attractive to a certain type of man and then get married and then have babies, right? You know, so it's challenging people to just be a bit deeper, to reach in a bit deeper. And then I think as I have aged, I mean, I don't have kids, which is kind of interesting. I never really wanted to, and that's another very strong story. It's a really strong story. You know, people have said to me in the past, something wrong with you if you didn't want to have children. Something wrong with you as a human if you didn't want to have children. Okay, that's a really strong story. You know, so I get to have the identity of a woman that doesn't have children. You know, and some people will feel really sorry for me, and I'm kind of like, okay. Personally, I'm delighted by the fact that I don't have children, especially in lockdown, right? I've seen what it's like. Yeah, and I have a dog, right? So that's kind of the same. So
not quite the same, but I understand.
I think there's a constant challenging the narratives, right? What it like trying to reveal the stories that people live inside, sometimes completely unconsciously, right? So I'll try to reveal this story. What is the story of this phase of my life, right? So and what is the act of will that allows me to assert the identity I choose that may be congruent with that story, but it may not be, right? It may not be. And well, again, it actually does link to power in some ways, you're saying here, because it's the power within yourself to try to disrupt those stories. Sometimes I'm successful at that, but sometimes I'm not successful at that, because sometimes the story is incredibly powerful. And by that, I mean that it's shared by everyone. And it's really hard to go against the grain if it's a really deeply shared story.
Like a full-on mythology.
Yeah, exactly. Like, this is just how it is. This is how women are. This is how men are. This is what it's like to be a human. You know, this is what it's like to age, for example, because now I'm interested in aging, right? This is what it's like to age. This is what it's like to be an old woman, right? You know, so it's absolutely crucial. And I think it's crucial because there's a beautiful David Whyte poem. I can't remember the name of it. It could be The House of Belonging or something like that, where he talks about you must give up on all worlds other than the world to which you belong.
Yes.
And that, you might know that one, but that poem, there's much more to the poem, but that bit in particular has really always struck me. It's been quite hard to live by. And I think that you only get to be in the world that you belong in if you know who you are. And you need to do your own inner work. You know, to some extent, the inner work is the outer work. Yes. As well. So the challenging of identity in the self is what enables you to do the challenging of the larger systems. And again, like, you know, you're speaking to me as an authentic, and I'm slightly, am I? I'm not sure, you know, because I don't always manage to do it. Sometimes I step back into the comfort of the collective story.
But I think that is partly what defines authenticity, is that willingness to keep reframing and keep looking back at oneself and saying, am I being honest here? And that is not a practice that people who are not authentic do. You know, they don't do that. They don't question themselves for whatever reason that is. And we have empathy and compassion for them for whatever that story is. But there are people who are in senior leadership positions who don't do that. And the world is one way and fixed. So it actually is a hallmark of authenticity that we fail. It is a hallmark of authenticity that we continue to look and don't like sometimes what we see, and we do our best in the best of circumstances. But I think you're absolutely right that, you know, to look at this idea of constant iteration.
Yeah.
So the second one was that relationship with power. And I'm curious about your story, Lee, because of that dimension. You have recognized in your own journey that a positional power is useful to serve the purpose.
Yeah.
And necessary, perhaps, according to the purpose you're serving.
Yes. I think power is fascinating.
Yeah.
It's absolutely fascinating because, again, people have lots of stories about what it is, right? Yeah. People have stories that it's bad, that it's wrong, that it's good, that it's useful, that it should be claimed, that it should be given away, that it should be shared. You know, we have our stories about power. I think power dynamics are really interesting to look at in society. So partly politics is an example of that. So you can look and see who has the power here, right? If you look at everything that's considered a power position, right? So that has an ability to influence, to make, you know, create laws of the land or policies in an organization, and where the wealth goes. If you look across society and ask yourself, well, who is in those positions? Then you know who has power. So in the UK, that generally speaking is white, middle class, heterosexual men, not entirely, right? And that doesn't make them bad and wrong. It just means that's kind of how that is. And there's so much to say about this. I think there's a really interesting, I know many of those types of men and love them, right? And they have this amazing ability to just assume that they'll have power, right? And I don't think they even think about it as power. They assume that they will move through the world in quite an easy way, that things will go their way, that the legislation that gets passed will be in their interests. Not because they're saying it's in my interest and not theirs, but because what they see is only their world, right? So the world looks quite easy to them. And if I contrast that to a session that I did in London a few months ago, where it was for women who were interested in getting into politics, and we had quite a lot of younger women in the audience, and we had lots of young women from a Black and ethnic minority background. And when I spoke to them about power, quite a few of them didn't really know what I was talking about, and hadn't ever allowed themselves to wonder what they would do if they had it. And I thought that was really interesting. They wanted to get in politics because they wanted to represent, right? They wanted there to be more Black women in power, right? Which is great. So they wanted to be able to see themselves, and they wanted other people to be able to see them. But beyond that, the question of, okay, so if you have the power, what would you do with it? They were just looking at me going like, I don't know. So there's a really interesting dynamic in society where some people are raised in a way to know that their answer to that question really quite early on, you know. So if you're, I mean, I like, again, this is my story. If you go to Eton, I think you're probably actually encouraged to think about what you would do once you're in power, right? If you're in a comprehensive somewhere in a school that doesn't have much money, where no one has a high expectations for you, you're probably not encouraged to imagine how you would use your power anyway. And because you can't even imagine it, you don't have any route to claiming it. So there's multiple angles to that. I want people to have power. I just want there to be variety in the types of people that have power, so decisions are better for everybody. And I want a whole different range of people to understand that they can have it and that they can use it. You know, they can create a group in their community that lobbies for something, that speaks on behalf of that person who can't speak for themselves, that gets something done. I'm very about the action, and that's for me what power is. It's the ability to cause action.
Yes. Yeah, and interestingly, the difference between the authentics, if we're talking about a bracket of people, the difference between those who love to navel gaze and sort of self-improve as a means to its own end, have not considered this question. What is my relationship to power, and what kind of power am I seeking in order to make the influence that I want to happen in the world? You know, and there's lots of people sort of go quite spiritual at that point, or they'll go to Gandhi and be the change and all that kind of stuff. But it's so esoteric and amorphous, it doesn't actually mean anything. What you've got to do, is what I'm hearing you say, is apply yourself to something meaningful and get that done. And that is the exercise of your power.
Yes, you have to be in the world. I think it's very interesting looking at what's happening right now around the Black Lives Matter movement. There's a lot of energy and action coming out. There are conversations and there's action, right? People have been talking about this for quite a long time. Now there's action and there's more movement. Yes. And one of the things I see happen a lot, especially online, and at the moment we're all online all the time, is that people sometimes mistake words for deeds. So this was the motto of the suffragettes, right? Trying to get the vote, you know, which was a process that took, 50 years or something. You know, it wasn't just one activity. It took a long time. And their motto was deeds, not words. Because words are meant. So it's easy to say the right thing, right? But it is not, it does not substitute for doing the right thing.
Right.
And I think we need to encourage ourselves and others to not think that just speaking is the job done. So online petitions, great. I've started a few in my time. Do they change anything? No, right? They don't. No. And if your activism is only to click a button or to say I'm an ally to whatever cause it is that you want to ally, that's great, and that makes you feel a lot better and probably makes people around you feel better too. But does anything change? Probably not. So again, this is why I'm focused on action, and I think that's something that we really need to pay attention to right now in this moment.
Right.
It's about making sure that we translate our good intentions into tangible action and outcomes.
And action needs skill, right? So you need to be able to have enough self-belief and enough interpersonal skill to, if you're starting something yourself, let's say, or maybe even as a group of you and you've had an idea, you've got to be able to find influence. And if, you know, sometimes in this world where a soundbite can make the difference between success and failure, sad but true in some cases, how do you develop the skills? Let's say you're one of the people that you're talking about, that they haven't had much education, much opportunity. Nobody's really supported them or believed in them. There isn't the money, the resources. I come from an ordinary school in an ordinary town, but I've got something I want to make a change for. That's authentic. That's a definition of authenticity.
Yeah.
So how do I do that? What do I do to get myself skilled for that?
Well, I suppose you find your gang, right? You find your tribe, the bunch of collaborators. So you don't try to do it alone. So if I think about what we do in the Parliament project, you know, we get women together. It used to be in a room, but now it's on Zoom. And we have conversations, right? What would it be like for you to do this? You know, we encourage women to think about the skills that they already have. So this is in the context of politics, right? So a lot of women are kind of interested. I might be interested in being an MP. What do they do exactly? And how do I get there? Because it's quite mysterious, right? It's quite mysterious. And we'll say to them, well, you know, have you ever organized anything in your local community? Yeah, sure. I've organized a party, or, you know, I've gone and campaigned for this, I've gone and campaigned for that. Well, do you realize that the skills of organizing, speaking, enrolling others, knocking on doors, etc., are the skills that you would need to get into politics? Oh, no, I had no idea. I already have those skills. Yes, you do. So part of it is encouraging people to actually just see what they already have, right? So the people that come to our workshops are probably already in that space, you know. And some of them get so fired up, they're like, right, I'm going to do it. I'm going to attend my local party meeting. They might have been scared to attend a local party meeting. They'll rock up. Someone will be like, oh, a woman, hooray. Hey, would you like to become the candidate, right? This has happened. This happened to someone I know. They joined a party. They went to the local meeting. On their first meeting, someone said, you're great. You know, you're a woman in business. You should be the candidate. Don't worry, you won't win. It's just being on the ballot. So she was like, okay, fine. If I won't win, that's fine, because I run a business, can't really do that. And then, of course, she got elected. And then she was a councillor. Because politics is also bonkers, right? It's like, there's no direct route to anything in politics. Yeah, so it's kind of about helping people have a new relationship to who they already are and the skills that they already have, and then connecting them together.
Yeah. I absolutely love that we don't need anything other than what we've got, right? All we need to do is just take action and learn and grow and be curious as we go. I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, I mean, you might need resource, you know, you might need finance. I mean, and that especially comes up. So if we're talking about women, you know, one of the key things that stops women from being able to go into politics is, generally speaking, and not always, if they have children, they'll be the ones that are doing, if not the bulk of they've got the kid in the evening or whatever, and campaigning happens in the evening, right? So either you need money for someone to look after your kid, or you need your partner to do it. They might not be willing to do that, you know. So you either need money or you need your team, you know. So you often do need something else. But it's very unlikely someone's just going to come along and give you it. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Because that's not how power operates. You know, sometimes it's there for the claiming, but you still need to do the claiming. Yeah. Right. And sometimes you can create it within whatever your group is.
Yes.
Yeah. So you can't wait until you get that. But yeah, sometimes you do need other things.
I'm particularly interested in how those kind of motivations get catalyzed. I was struck by something you said earlier. You said something like, someone should do that. There's something out there, someone should do that. And then you said, well, if I'm thinking that, then I should go and do that. For many people, that kind of thinking would be out of reach. You know, they don't have the self-confidence or the network to be able to achieve something which they perceive to be wrong in society. And often what we're finding through this process is that there might have been a significant moment for an individual. Either somebody else came along and said, you're really good at this, you're fantastic, you should lead. Or there's some kind of internal moment where people are going, no, this is something I have to take for myself, and off I go. And I was curious about that fulcrum for you. Was there a single moment or a series of moments? What happened for you to be in this powerful place now?
I don't know really, but that feeling that, you know, you're just, when I said, oh, that's me then, right? That happens to me quite a lot. That happens to me quite a lot. I love starting things, right? I have an awful lot of instigating energy. I know people, especially poets, write about inspiration coming in, right? Or like an idea floats about and it comes over to you, and do you want to take it or do you not? And if you don't, fine, it goes somewhere else, right? I've definitely seen that. I've felt an idea hover and been like, oh, no, I'm not going to do that. And then a month later, I see someone else do it, fine.
Yeah.
But when it catches me, all I can see is the possibility of the thing. I can't see any of the problems. And that is incredibly useful, right? So I've also learned along the way, and this is great and bad, right? That you just put it out into the world, right? So you know that metaphor of you throw your hat over the wall, right? And then you have to go over and get it, right? So with the Parliament project, for example, when I did the first round of it, I was just like, I'm going to do this. And then I was like, okay, so how should I do it? Right, well, I should speak to the women's officers in the parties, right? So I'd be like, okay, well, I'll make up a name, I'll buy a domain name, so I'll create an email address, I'll make a website, because I find all those things really easy. I'll just email them, right? And I'll be like, hey, I'm Lee, I'm going to do this thing, can we have a coffee, right? And then I'd rock up, and then and they'd be like, so tell me what you've done. I'd be like, nothing. But this is what I'd like to do, right? And they're like, yeah, that sounds kind of cool. And I just go and talk. I just like talk until somehow enough people know about it, and then I'm like, oh, now I really have to do something. And then, because I'm quite a procrastinator, and then so I force myself by publicly speaking about something when it's not really in existence into creating it.
Right. Yeah. And I'm hearing that is coming from you. That is coming from inside you. There isn't a sense of some previous event where somebody said, you are Lee Chalmers and you can go and do this. Nobody gave you that self-belief. You've claimed it.
No, I've claimed it. No, it's interesting you should say that. So through the years, when people haven't done that, they haven't said to me, you know, you should X, Y, Z. But what they sometimes do is they want me to come and bring my spark into their thing, which is quite interesting. You know, come and bring that amazing starting energy into my project. And, you know, sometimes I'm like, okay, that sounds really good. And then I'm over there and I'm like, oh, I have no connection to it, right? I have no deeper purpose to it. I suppose that is a way of saying I'm not entirely in conscious control of that energy. Right? I can't just like turn it on. You know, sometimes it's there and sometimes it's not there. Yeah. And because I've thrown my hat over the fence and announced to the world I'm going to do it, that's what makes me get over the moments when I'm like, why did I do this? It was going to be really hard. Yeah.
But what I love about that is that you're kind of doing that in a conscious way. That you know that about yourself, and you know that there are going to be moments of difficulty where the energy leaves you. And so you've found mechanisms to keep you honest to the original intent.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Lovely. Nice. Yeah. So what sort of leadership does the world need now, Lee?
It needs, just even the question, feels like such a big piece of work, actually.
Yeah, it does.
Well, it needs less of that toxic kind of white male supremacist type leadership, right? It needs less of that. It needs that to kind of hand over power, which of course it's not going to, because part of its the whole thing is about holding on to it. Right? And space for everything else, right? Which is why it's kind of hard for me to say like what one type should there be. Another reason that I sometimes come up against people who will say women lead like this, right? Men lead like that, women lead like this. I don't like that because that's another boxed in story, right? I don't really want to switch one boxed in story for a different set of people that look different but have an equally rigid boxed in story.
Yeah.
You know, I think we need leaders who are strong in their own sense of identity, meaning that they don't have to look good, right? They can take decisions that they know are ethical and right, even if it makes them look bad. So they're not fragile, they don't have fragile egos. That they are able to really see widely and listen to a wide range of people, that they see who their people are, right? All of them. And that they're able to find mechanisms to get those perspectives up and into their policy making decisions. And that's probably iterative processes. So very consultative, but not to the point of paralysis, right? That they are able to, at the end of the day, say the buck stops with me and this is how it's going to go.
Right. But
that those decisions are made in a very, very educated way. That it's not all about the money, but that it's also not about the money, right? Because the economy is massively important, and I sometimes see people saying, you know, people not profit or people not the economy, and it's kind of like, it's all actually the same thing. It's all actually the same thing. So somebody who's able to really balance those issues and understand the interconnectedness of all of us, and I think lockdown has really shown that, you know, that it all matters and it all has to be taken care of. Oh, this is going to be like really left field, but I'm reading this great sci-fi series at the moment. I love sci-fi, and I think a lot of my thinking has been informed by sci-fi, because sci-fi challenges narratives, right? And there's this one role which is the kind of leader of a planet. It's the person who's like the mentor or the counselor for the planet, right? And anyone in the planet can come and see them. And that role is traditionally given to someone that doesn't want it.
Yeah.
And there's something about that. There's something about, you know, not, like, to your point, not just seeking power for power's sake.
Yeah.
That, I think, is what we need. So Jacinda Ardern would be an example of someone.
Well, I was going to ask you if there are any examples out there.
Yeah, and I don't know her too well, and I don't really know the whole story about her, and I'm really conscious of, you know, we're very quick to judge when someone's less than perfect, and we totally require perfection from our leaders. I think we need to stop doing that, right? Yeah. We need to give leaders the space to be human and to develop and to grow and to err and to be vulnerable and all of that. So we need to stop being so ridiculously harsh on what we expect. So I think she's great. Nicola Sturgeon's good. And it's really been watching how she's been leading Scotland through this lockdown and this pandemic in a quite different way than Boris Johnson has been leading. So even just the way she does her briefings, right? It's always been her, and she speaks to you like she was in your house. Yeah. It's a real kind of like human way of expressing herself.
Well, one of the good things about her leadership is that she actually turns up. You know, she's not absent, which is quite important as a national leader.
Yeah. Well, I think she's got an interest in leading.
Yeah, totally. Well, Lee, thank you so much. That was a fantastic roller coaster ride across the terrain of so many different subjects, but really, really insightful. And I love your take on on authenticity as well, and that need. I mean, what I'm particularly struck by in your story is that need, recognition, not a need, recognition that power is essential for change, and that is something many authentics, I think, would take a lot from that story. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure, and why wouldn't we? You're ideal. So, thank you very much. And you know, any doubts you have about your own journey or your own power, you know, I know they're always going to come up, and they come up for me too. But don't doubt that it's there, and hopefully these words can ripple outwards and help some other people as well.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks so much.